The cop's hand closed around her arm and yanked her up out of the deep leather chair. Her coffee tipped over, spread across the glass table, and dripped down onto the pale carpet. Not one person in that quiet room stood up to help her. He was loud now, telling her she did not belong, that people like her had walked into the wrong place by mistake. She did not raise her voice. She did not pull her arm away. She looked at his hand, then she looked at his face, and she stayed very still. Her name was Danielle Cross, and 400 miles away there were grown men who would drop everything the second she called. Men who feared almost nothing, feared her quiet voice. So why was she just sitting there, letting a man like this put his hands on her? Stay with me on this one. Let me back up a little, because you need to see how the morning started, and you need to see her before he touched her. She came into that lounge a little after 6 in the morning, when the light through the tall windows was still gray and soft. She had a small black bag over one shoulder and a paper folder under her arm. She wore a plain gray sweater, dark jeans, clean boots, and no jewelry except a thin gold band on her left hand that she had never once taken off, not in 11 years. She did not look like much, and that was the point. She had spent most of her life learning that the less you look like, the more you get to see. People show you who they really are when they think you are nobody. The young woman behind the desk scanned her pass and smiled the way you smile at everybody. Danielle smiled back and thanked her by name, because the name was right there on the little tag, and Danielle had learned a long time ago that saying a person's name costs you nothing and gives them something. The girl's name was Mara. She was maybe 22. She had tired eyes and chewed nail polish, and she pointed Danielle toward the coffee and the quiet corner by the window like she was handing over a small secret. There was a moment there, small, that mattered later, so I'll give it to you now. As Danielle turned toward the corner, she heard the desk phone ring, and she heard Mara's voice go thin and careful, the way a young person's voice goes when somebody with power is on the other end of the line. Yes, sir. No, sir. I understand, I'll keep an eye out. And when Mara hung up, she looked over at Danielle in the corner, and her face had a worry in it that had nothing to do with coffee. Danielle noticed. She noticed everything. She filed it away the way she filed away everything, in that cold, quiet drawer in the back of her mind, where she kept the pieces until they were ready to make a picture. She did not know yet what the phone call meant. She would. Danielle took the corner. She always took the corner. From the corner you can see the door, and you can see the room, and nobody can come up behind you. That was not fear. That was just how she was built now, after all these years. She set her folder down. She poured a coffee, black, and she sat in that deep leather chair and let out one long breath. She had a hard trip ahead of her. She was flying to bury a man she had known for 30 years, a man the whole club had called preacher, and she had not slept much, and all she wanted was 1 hour of quiet before the day came and took everything out of her. She got about 15 minutes. Now, in those 15 minutes, let me show you the room, because the room is part of this. There were maybe 20 people in that lounge, scattered the way people scatter when they want to pretend they are alone. Businessmen in good suits with bad postures, bent over laptops. A tired mother in the far corner with a sleeping toddler across her knees, and a diaper bag, and the 1,000-yard stare of a woman who had been awake since 3. 2 airline pilots by the coffee, talking low about a delay in another city. An old couple sharing a newspaper, passing sections back and forth without a word, the way you do when you have been married so long that talking is optional. And one heavy man in a blue jacket, alone, with a phone in his hand and a restlessness about him. A man who looked like he was hunting for something to make his morning interesting. Danielle read all of them in about 90 seconds, without seeming to look at any of them. That was a habit 30 years deep. You walk into a room and you find the exits and you find the trouble, and you find the ones who might need help, and you do it before you sit down, and then you let your shoulders drop, and you let the world think you are just a tired woman with a coffee. She had learned that from Ray. Ray used to say a room is a sentence, and most people never bother to read it. She read this one. And what she read was ordinary. A soft gray morning. Nobody in trouble. Nobody her problem. She let her shoulders drop. She closed her eyes for just a second, and she thought about Preacher, and about the eulogy she had not written because she did not believe in writing them down, and she felt the tiredness come up over her like water. Then the glass doors opened, and the temperature of the room changed, and she opened her eyes. The officer came in like he owned the building. Airport police, dark blue, a badge on his chest, and a name plate that said BRANDT. He was maybe 40, thick through the neck and shoulders, the kind of man who had been the biggest guy in every room since he was 14, and had built his whole life on top of that one fact. He walked the length of the lounge slow, hands on his belt, chin up, looking everybody over. Businessmen in suits. The tired mother with the sleeping toddler. The two pilots. Nobody looked up. Everybody knew that game. You do not make eye contact with a man who is hunting for a reason. And here is a thing Danielle saw that nobody else did. As Brant came in, his eyes went first to the desk, to Mara, and Mara gave him the smallest nod, and then her eyes flicked, just for an instant, toward the corner. Toward Danielle. And Mara's face when she did it was sick with shame, because she was young and she was scared, and somebody with power had told her on the phone to keep an eye out and point out anybody who did not look right. And she had done it before she understood what she was doing, and now she could not take it back. Danielle saw the whole small tragedy of it in half a second. A girl used as a pointer by a man with a plan. She did not blame Mara. She never once blamed Mara. But she understood right then that this was not an accident. This was a route Brant walked. This was a thing he did. His eyes landed on Danielle in the corner, and they stopped. Now here is the thing you have to understand. There was nothing wrong. She had a valid pass. She had a business-class ticket that cost more than most people made in a week, because when you run what she ran, you fly where you need to, and you do it without a lot of noise. But Officer Brant looked at a black woman in a gray sweater sitting alone in the best corner of a room full of suits, and something in him decided she was a problem before she had said a single word. He walked over. He stood too close, right over her, blocking her light. "This is a private lounge," he said. Loud. Loud enough that the pilots turned their heads. Danielle looked up at him, calm. "Yes, sir. I know. You got a pass." "I do." She reached into her bag, unhurried, and held up the little card. He did not take it. He barely glanced at it. "Where'd you get that?" he said. Not a question. An accusation with a period on the end. Bought it, she said. Same place everybody does. A couple of the suits were watching now, pretending not to. The heavy man in the blue jacket with the phone in his hand had the beginning of a smile on his face. He liked this. Some men love to watch a big dog corner a small one. It makes them feel safe about the world. Danielle clocked him too. She clocked the phone. She did not know yet whether that phone would be a weapon pointed at her or a weapon she could turn, but she filed it cold in the drawer. See, I don't think so. Brandt said. We've been having a problem with people sneaking in here, using passes that aren't theirs. So how about you come with me and we sort it out? I'm happy to sort it out right here. Danielle said. My name's on the reservation. My ID matches the ticket. You can radio the desk. Mara scanned me in 10 minutes ago. He did not want the easy answer. You could see it on him. The easy answer ended the show, and he had come in wanting a show. I'm not gonna ask you again, he said. You haven't asked me anything yet, she said, still quiet, still even. You've just been telling me. That did it. That little bit of dignity, that refusal to shrink, it lit him up. His face went red at the edges. And that is when his hand came down and closed around her arm and yanked her up out of the chair, and her coffee went over, and the whole room went still, and not one person stood up. That is where we came in. So now you are caught up. And now you get to watch what he did not understand. Because Danielle Cross had been grabbed by bigger men than Kyle Brandt. She had been grabbed by men who meant it, men who wanted to hurt her, men who found out the hard way what she was made of. She did not flinch. She stood the way he pulled her up, and she looked down at his hand on her arm, and then she looked at his face, and she said very softly, Officer, you're going to want to take your hand off me. He laughed. He actually laughed. Or what? Or nothing, she said. I'm just telling you what you're going to want. There's a difference. Now let me tell you who she was, because you cannot understand what came next unless you understand what she carried in that quiet body of hers. 11 years back, her husband ran the club. Ray Cross. He was a mountain of a man with a soft voice and hard eyes, and he had built something out of a rough thing and made it into a family, a real one, the kind that shows up. When Ray got sick, the kind of sick that does not get better, a lot of people figured the whole thing would fall apart or get eaten by the men who had always wanted a piece of it. And in his last months, Ray did something nobody expected. He named her his wife. He put it to the table, and the table fought about it, and some of the old ones walked, and Ray looked at all of them from his wheelchair and said, She's got more spine than any of you, and she never once needed to prove it by breaking something. That's what I want at the head of this. She earned the rest herself. That is the part people forget. Ray opened the door, but she walked through it and held it for 11 years, through a war with a crew out of 2 states over, through the loss of brothers, through the FBI camped on her block for a summer, through funerals and christenings and midnight calls that would turn your hair white. She never raised her voice, and she never had to, because the men around her had learned that when Danielle Cross went quiet, that was the storm, not the calm. She did not run the club like a gang. She ran it like a promise. You do not touch the small ones. You do not let the strong take from the weak. You show up. That was the whole of it. Let me give you one story about her, so it isn't just words. There was a winter, maybe 6 years back, when a landlord 3 towns over was squeezing an old woman named Miss Alma out of the house she had lived in for 50 years, changing the locks while she was at church, tossing her furniture on the lawn in the sleet, the kind of legal enough cruelty that the law is too slow and too bored to stop. Somebody who knew somebody told the club. And a lot of the young ones wanted to ride over there and put the fear of God into that landlord with engines and numbers and the general suggestion of violence. Danielle told them no. She went herself, alone in a borrowed sedan and a church coat, and she sat in that landlord's office for 4 hours, quiet, patient, reading a magazine until he agreed to see her. And then she talked to him for 20 minutes in a voice so low he had to lean in to hear it. And when she left, Miss Alma had her house back and a written apology and a year of rent forgiven. And nobody ever knew exactly what Danielle said. That was how she worked. She used to say the loudest thing in any room is a person who cannot be rushed. She did not need the engines. She was the thing the engines were for. And she had one more rule, the one she lived by hardest, the one Ray gave her at the very end. He held her hand and he said, "The measure of you is not how you treat the men who can hurt you back. It's how you carry yourself in front of the ones who think you can't hurt them at all. Make them show you who they are. Then decide." So that is what she was doing, standing there with Brant's hand on her arm. She was letting him show her who he was. "You're leaving," Brant said. "Right now. Grab your bag." "My coffee's on your carpet," she said. "You'll pay for the cleaning, too." "Officer Brant," she said, reading his name plate slow, saying it the way you say a name you intend to remember. "I'd like you to call your supervisor. And I'd like the desk to pull my scan record. And I'd like a name and badge number for the report I'm going to file. That's 3 reasonable things. You can do all 3 without anyone getting embarrassed." The word embarrassed landed on him wrong. He heard a threat in it. Men like Brant always hear the truth as a threat, because the truth is the one thing they cannot arrest. He leaned in close to her ear and he said, low so the room could not hear it, "You file whatever you want, sweetheart. Who do you think they're gonna believe? You or me?" And there it was. He had shown her. She nodded slow, like a woman making a note in a book only she could read. "Okay," she said. "Thank you for that." He walked her toward the doors, one hand still gripping her arm, marching her past the suits and the pilots and the tired mother, past the heavy man in the blue jacket who was smiling wide now and lifting his phone to film it, because of course he was. "And here is a small thing, because I want you to see everybody clear in this story, not just the heroes." The tired mother, the one with the toddler, she started to stand up. She did. She got halfway out of her chair, her mouth open to say something, and the man next to her, a stranger in a suit, put a hand on her shoulder and shook his head, "Not now, not your business." And she looked at her sleeping child and she sat back down, and her face crumpled with the shame of it, and she stared at her own hands for the rest of the time Danielle was in that room. Danielle saw that too. Later she would say that the woman who almost stood was braver than most of the men who sat, because at least she felt it. Most people train themselves not to feel it. That is how the machine keeps running. It runs on people teaching themselves not to feel it. Danielle did not hide her face. She looked right at the man's camera, calm as Sunday, and she let him get his little movie. Let it exist. Let there be a record. She was already thinking 3 moves down the board, the way she always did, the way Ray had taught her when they were young and broke, and sitting on the floor of a garage that smelled like oil and gasoline. At the desk, Brant made Mara cancel Danielle's access. The girl's hands were shaking. "Sir, she scanned and fine. She's on the—" "Cancel it," Brant said. Mara looked at Danielle, and Danielle gave her the smallest shake of the head. Don't fight him. Don't lose your job over this. It's all right." And Mara, near tears, canceled it. Danielle mouthed 2 words at her. "Not your fault." Then she picked up her bag and her folder, and she let herself be walked out into the wide, bright hallway of the terminal, and the glass doors hissed shut behind her, and Officer Brant finally let go of her arm. "Have a nice flight," he said and grinned, and turned back inside to his little kingdom. Danielle stood in the hallway. She rubbed the spot on her arm where his fingers had been. She did not shake. She did not curse. She took out her phone, and she looked at it for a long moment, and then she put it away without making a call. Not yet. Not because she was afraid. Because she had a rule about anger, and the rule was this: never move while it's hot. Cold is where the real work gets done. She found a seat out in the general terminal, a hard plastic chair by a window, and she watched the planes push back in the gray morning. A janitor came by pushing a cart and nodded at her, and she nodded back and asked him how his shift was going, and he said long, and she said she knew that feeling. And for a minute the 2 of them just watched the planes together, and it was almost peaceful. His name was Gus. He'd been pushing that cart 11 years, he said, same as she'd been running her club, though of course he didn't know that part. He told her the airport had changed. Used to be the cops down here knew everybody's name, he said, and now they were a different breed, and he lowered his voice without quite knowing why, and said there was one in particular, big fella, that the cleaning crew had learned to steer around, because he had a way of finding trouble in people who weren't carrying any. Gus didn't say the name. He didn't have to. He just shook his head and pushed his cart on, and Danielle sat with that, cold in the drawer, another piece sliding into the picture. A gate agent announced a delay to somewhere warm. A kid ran by chasing a paper airplane. Danielle bought a bottle of water from a machine and drank half of it and felt her heartbeat come all the way back down to normal. The worst was over, she figured. She'd sorted out with a phone call, quietly, the grown-up way, once she'd landed and buried her friend. Just a bad man having a bad morning at her expense. She'd had worse Tuesdays. She let herself believe it was done. It was not done. It was barely started. Here is what pulled her back up out of that plastic chair. Movement over by the far security line, fast and wrong. 2 officers walking a young man toward a gray, unmarked door, one on each arm, and the young man saying, "Please, please, I didn't do anything, my flight's in 20 minutes. And one of the officers was Brant. Danielle stood up. She did not decide to stand up. Her body just did it, the way it had done for 30 years whenever the strong closed in on the weak. She watched from 40 feet away, and she read the whole thing the way she read everything, quick and cold and complete. The young man was maybe 19. Backpack hoodie, university lanyard around his neck. Scared out of his mind. And the two cops were not treating him like a suspect. They were treating him like a delivery. Bored. Practiced. Routine. They walked him through that gray door and it closed, and the second officer, a wiry guy with a mustache, glanced back over his shoulder to see who was watching, and that glance told Danielle more than an hour of talking ever could. That was not a man doing his job. That was a man checking the room before he did his crime. Now the whole thing turned. Stay with me, because this is where it stops being about a rude cop and a spilled coffee, and starts being about something with teeth. Danielle had spent 11 years learning how systems eat people. She knew the shape of a shakedown, the way a farmer knows the shape of rain coming. Pick the ones who won't be believed. The young, the broke, the brown, the alone. Pull them somewhere with no cameras. Find something or bring something. Cash gets seized. A little bag gets found in a backpack that never held one. A signature gets pressured onto a form. And who do they tell? Who would believe them? That was not one bad man. That was a machine, and Brandt was just the arm of it, and she had walked into its mouth by accident and been spit back out because she'd made too much noise in front of too many suits. The kid behind that door had made no noise at all. And now the pieces in the cold drawer slid all the way together into a picture, and the picture was ugly. The phone call to Mara. Keep an eye out. The way Brandt's eyes went to the desk first. He wasn't hunting at random. He had the girl at the desk pointing out the ones who looked like they had a little money and no protection, the ones who'd flinch. He'd guessed wrong on Danielle, badly wrong, but the system didn't care about one wrong guess. It made its money on the right ones. And Danielle understood, standing there in that bright hall, that if she got on her flight and buried her friend and filed her polite complaint next week, that gray door would open and close a dozen more times before her plane even landed. Preacher would understand. Preacher, of all people, would understand why she wasn't going to get on that plane just yet. She walked to the gray door. She tried the handle. Locked. She knocked twice, calm and even. Nothing. She stepped back and looked up and found the little black dome of a camera in the ceiling, aimed at the hall but not at the door, and she understood the geometry of the whole thing in a heartbeat. They had picked their spot well. Whoever set this up knew exactly where the cameras looked and exactly where they didn't, which meant somebody with access to the camera maps, which meant this went higher than two cops and a gray door. Cold. In the drawer. She took out her phone. This time she made the call. It rang once. Bear, she said. It's me. Change of plan. I need you and whoever's close to the airport, Terminal C, and I need our lawyer on the phone before the wheels even turn. No colors. Nobody does anything loud. I want eyes, and I want it legal, and I want it fast. There's a boy about to lose everything, and I'm not going to stand here and let it happen. She listened for a second. No. I'm fine. I'm better than fine. Just come. She listened again, and something in her face softened just a little. Bear. Bring Rachel. And Bear, bring it clean. This one we win with paper, not with noise. Preacher would have wanted paper. She hung up. And if you're still with me, hit that subscribe button, because what these men did next, and what she did back, is the part people do not believe until they hear the whole thing. While she waited, she did not wait quietly. She started to work. She walked back down the hall to the lounge doors, and through the glass she caught Mara's eye, and she held up her phone and mouthed camera and pointed at the ceiling. Mara, God bless that scared girl, understood. She held up one finger. Wait. Then she typed something, and a second later Danielle's phone buzzed with a message from a number she did not know. It said, "He does this. I think 3 or 4 a week, always same door. I can pull the entry logs before shift change, but I can't be the one who." And then it stopped because Mara was afraid, and she had every right to be, because girls like Mara were exactly who the machine counted on to stay quiet. Danielle typed back, "You won't be. I promise you that. Just get me the logs and go home safe. I'll carry the rest." 3 dots appeared and went away and appeared again, and then Mara wrote the thing that told Danielle how deep the fear went. It said, "He told me if I ever talk he'll make sure I lose my visa. I'm on a student visa. I can't lose this job." And Danielle stood in that bright hallway and read that, and something old and hard turned over in her chest, because now she understood the whole shape of it. That was how they held the girl. Not with money. With her whole future. They had found the pressure point on a 22-year-old 1,000 miles from home, and they had leaned on it. And she had folded, the way anyone folds, and then they had used her folded hands to point at strangers. And Danielle typed back slow and careful, one word at a time, "Mara. Listen to me. Nobody is taking your visa. Not him, not anybody. I have a lawyer who eats men like this for lunch, and she is on her way here right now. You are not alone anymore. You stopped being alone the second I walked in this morning. You just didn't know it yet. Print the logs. Then go home and sleep. I've got it from here." She read it twice, and she sent it, and she watched the 3 dots, and after a long time Mara wrote back one word, "Okay." And then, a second later, "Thank you for saying my name this morning. Nobody says my name." Danielle had to look out the window for a second after that one. Then she went back to the gray door, and this time she did not knock. She sat down on the floor right in front of it, cross-legged, her folder in her lap, calm as a woman waiting for a bus. If they wanted to bring the boy out, they would have to step over her, and there would be a witness, and there would be a scene, and men who run quiet crimes hate a scene more than they hate anything on this earth. While she sat, she did one more thing, the kind of small, careful thing that wins wars. She took out her phone and she started her own recording, audio only, and she set it in the breast pocket of her sweater with the microphone up, and she said nothing about it to anyone. If the man's camera failed, if the logs walked, if Mara lost her nerve, she would still have the sound of it. Belt and suspenders. Ray used to say hope for the witness and plan for the silence. She planned for the silence. She also, sitting on that floor, sent one more text to Bear. It said, "Front of the terminal, keep the young ones home. Send me you, Rachel, and 2 who can stand still. I mean stand still. If anybody so much as flexes today, I'll have his patch. This is a paperwork day." And Bear, who had known her long enough to hear the steel under the comm, wrote back one word. "Copy." It took 9 minutes. The door opened. The wiry officer with the mustache came out first, and he nearly tripped over her and he barked, "Ma'am, you can't sit here, move along." "I'll move when the young man moves," she said. "He's got a flight." Brant filled the doorway behind him. When he saw who it was, that same red crept up the edges of his face. "You," he said. "I walked you out of here once already." "You did," she agreed. "And now I'm back. Funny how that works. Get up." "No," she said, gentle as anything. "You're going to let that boy walk to his gate, right now, with everything he came in with. And then you and I are going to have a conversation about the logs on that door, and how many times a week it opens for a scared kid and closes on an empty backpack." The mustache went pale. Brant did not. Brant got bigger. "Stand up and put your hands behind your back," he said. "You're under arrest. Obstruction. Trespassing. Resisting." "I haven't resisted anything," Danielle said. "I'm sitting on a floor." "You're resisting now." He reached down and grabbed her again, the same arm, the same grip, and this time he meant to hurt, hauling her up so hard her shoulders screamed. And she let him. She let him do it right there in the wide open hall where the cameras that did work could see, and where a small crowd had started to gather at the edges, and where a heavy man in a blue jacket, the very same one from the lounge, was standing 30 feet away with his phone up, still filming, God love his nosy heart, getting all of it in the good light. Now let me tell you about that man, because he mattered, and because nothing in this story is an accident. His name was Denny Kessler. He sold industrial fasteners, screws and bolts and washers, and he flew 40 weeks a year and hated every minute of it. And he was, by his own cheerful admission, a nosy man who filmed everything because his life was boring and other people's trouble was not. He had filmed the lounge because he thought he was going to watch a woman get what was coming to her, and somewhere between the lounge and the hallway, watching how she carried herself, watching her sit down on that floor for a kid she'd never met, Denny Kessler had quietly changed sides. He didn't say anything. He just kept filming, and now he was filming for her instead of at her, and he had angled himself so he had Brant's face and the gray door and the boy in the same frame. A boring man with a phone had become the most important camera in the building, and he knew it, and for the first time in a long time, Denny Kessler felt like his day meant something. "There it is," Danielle said quietly, mostly to herself, as Brant cuffed her wrists behind her. "There you are again." The boy, Marcus, they had him by the door now, cuffed too, tears on his face. "Ma'am, don't. They'll do you like they're doing me. Please don't get in trouble for me." "Son," Danielle said, and her voice for the first time filled the whole hall, warm and steady and absolutely without fear. "Look at me." "What's your name?" "Marcus." "Marcus what?" "Marcus Bell." "Marcus Bell, you did nothing wrong, and everyone in this hallway is about to find that out. So you hold your head up. You hear me? Hold it up. Nobody in this building is going to take one more thing from you today. That's a promise, and where I come from, a promise is the only thing a person really owns." Brant laughed in her ear. "Big talk for a woman in handcuffs." "You keep saying things like that," she said, "and every time you do, you tell me you don't know who you've got. So let me help you." before your morning gets any worse. Call your watch commander. Tell him you've detained a woman named Danielle Cross. Gross. Spell it out for him. And then you watch his face, because his face is going to tell you everything I've been too polite to say. Something flickered in Brant then. Not fear yet, but the first cold draft of it, the way you feel a door open somewhere in a house you thought was empty. He didn't call. Men like him never call, because calling means admitting they might be wrong, and that was the one thing his whole life was built to never do. So he marched them both toward the gray door instead, Marcus and Danielle, to make them disappear the same as all the others. And let me slow this down, because this is the hinge of the whole thing, and I don't want you to miss it. In the doorway of that gray room, for just a second, Danielle looked past Brant and she saw inside. And what she saw put the last cold piece in the drawer. There was a metal desk in there, and on the desk was a plastic tray, and in the tray was a small clear bag with something in it, sitting next to Marcus Bell's open backpack. His backpack that they had already searched. His backpack that they had found nothing in, because there was nothing in it. The little bag was on the desk, not in the backpack. They hadn't finished the trick yet. She had walked up and sat down on that floor in the 9 minutes between the search that found nothing and the discovery that would ruin his life. And her sitting down was the only reason those two things had not yet become the same thing. She understood then that she had not just witnessed the machine. She had jammed it. She had put her body in the gears at the one moment the gears were exposed. And she thought, cold and clear, I need everyone to see inside that room before that door closes again. So she stopped walking. She planted her boots, and she was not a large woman, but she had a low center and 30 years of not being moved. And she said, loud, to the whole gathering hall, "There's a bag on that desk that didn't come out of his backpack. It's sitting in a tray. Everybody who can see this, remember that. Remember I said it before that door closed. There is a bag on the desk that was never in the boy's bag." And that is exactly when the terminal doors at the end of the hall opened, and the morning turned all the way over. You have to picture it. It was not loud. That is the part people always get wrong when they tell this story back. There were no engines, no chrome, no leather in that hallway, not yet. It was quieter than that, and quiet was worse. A man walked in. Older, gray in his beard, built low and wide, in a plain canvas jacket zipped to the neck. He walked slow because he did not need to walk fast. 2 more men came in behind him, ordinary looking, hands loose at their sides. And behind them, moving fast and sharp in a charcoal suit with a briefcase, a woman with silver glasses and the expression of somebody who bills by the minute and has never once lost. The man in the canvas jacket was Bear. Sam to the government. Danielle's second for 11 years, her husband's best friend for 30 before that. He took one look down that hall, saw his president in handcuffs with a red-faced cop gripping her bruised arm, and he stopped walking. He just stopped, and he stood very still, and anybody who knew him knew that stillness was the most dangerous thing in the state of that man. I want to tell you what it cost Bear to stand still, because that is its own kind of courage and it never gets told. Bear had buried a lot of people. Bear had come up in a world where you answered a hand on your family with both of yours, and every cell in his big body was screaming at him to cross that hall and take Brant apart. And he did not. He stood still, because his president had said clean, because she had said paper not noise, because in 11 years she had never once been wrong about which door led out, and he trusted her more than he trusted his own blood. Standing still for Bear was the hardest ride of his life. He did it perfectly. That is what discipline actually is. It is not the absence of the fire. It is the fire held. Brez. Bear called down the hall. Just that. One word. And Danielle, cuffed, shoved, her shoulder aching, lifted her chin and answered in a voice that carried like a bell. It's all right, Bear. Everybody stays cool. We do this clean. Brez. The word bounced down the tile. A couple of the gathered travelers heard it and did not understand it. Brant heard it and understood even less. But the mustache officer, the wiry one, he understood, because he watched more news than his partner, and the color ran right out of his face and kept running. Kyle, he said low and fast. Kyle. Kyle, that's. I think that's. Shut up. Brant said. Kyle, I mean it. That's the cross woman, that's the. And the mustache, whose name was Petey Cole, took his hands off Marcus Bell like the boy had gone hot to the touch, and took a step back, and you could see him already doing the math that men like him always do too late, the math of how do I get out of this? How do I make this his and not mine? That step back was the beginning of the end for Brant, though Brant didn't feel it yet. His own partner had just started building the wall he'd climb over later to save himself. The woman in the charcoal suit reached them first. She did not raise her voice either. She set her briefcase down on the floor, unhurried, and she looked at Brant over the top of her silver glasses. My name is Rachel Okafor, she said. I'm counsel to Ms. Gross. You have 30 seconds to take those handcuffs off my client before the next thing that happens becomes the most expensive decision of your career. And officer, I want you to hear me clearly, because the next part matters. I am already recording. That gentleman by the wall has been recording since the lounge. The desk attendant is at this moment printing the entry logs for that door behind you, going back 90 days. So before you do one more thing, I want you to ask yourself a question you should have asked 20 minutes ago. What if I've got the whole thing already? Brant's mouth opened. Nothing came out. And one more thing, Rachel said, and she nodded toward the open gray door, before somebody thinks about tidying up. There is a clear plastic bag in a tray on that desk. My client called it out in front of 40 witnesses 30 seconds ago. If that bag moves, if it so much as changes trays, every person in this hall is a witness to tampering, and that is a different and much worse morning for everyone wearing a badge in that room. So nobody touch the desk. Leave the room exactly as it is. Officer Cole, and here she looked at the mustache and used his name, which she had no business already knowing, and which frightened him more than anything else that had happened. Step away from the door and keep your hands where that camera can see them. Good. Thank you. The young man. Rachel said. Marcus Bell. Uncuff him. Now. He is leaving with us. He had. Brant started. He had nothing. Danielle said quietly. You know he had nothing because you hadn't put it in yet. That's why the door was still closed. I watched you check the hallway before you walked him through it. I've been watching men check hallways my whole life, officer. You've got to tell. You all do. For a long, long second, nobody moved. And in that second, the whole shape of Kyle Brandt's morning became clear to him at last. He had picked, out of an entire airport, out of every soul who walked through those glass doors, the one woman in the country he most should have left alone. He had put his hands twice on the head of an organization that a lot of very hard men would walk through fire for. And she had let him. She had let him do all of it, calm and quiet in the good light in front of the cameras, so that when this exact second came, there would be no argument left to have. "Take the cuffs off both of them," said a new voice, tired and heavy, and everyone turned. An older man in a supervisor's uniform was hurrying up the hall, radio in hand, sweat on his forehead. The watch commander. Somebody had finally called somebody. Brandt. Brandt, are you out of your mind? Take them off. Take them off right now. He'd gotten a call. Danielle would learn later that the call came from 3 directions at once, and one of those directions was a phone number that made airport administrators sit up very straight. Bear had made his calls too. I'll tell you about that call, because it's a small good thing in a hard story. When Bear had rolled in, one of the 2 quiet men behind him had peeled off without a word and gone to the airport administration office, and he had asked, very politely, to speak to whoever was in charge, and he had explained, very politely, that a member of the airport police was at this moment assaulting a woman in Terminal C in full view of a dozen cameras and a lawyer and a man with a phone, and that this was the kind of thing that ends up on the news and ends careers, and that the administration had about 90 seconds to be on the right side of it or the wrong side of it, their choice. He was very polite the whole time. He did not raise his voice once. He didn't have to. That's a thing the club understood that Brandt never would. You don't need to be loud when you're telling the truth, and the truth is a freight train. Brandt's hands shook as he uncuffed Marcus. The boy stumbled forward and Rachel steadied him and murmured something, and he started to cry, really cry, the way you cry when the worst thing that was about to happen to your whole life suddenly does not. Then Brandt turned to Danielle, and his fingers fumbled with the cuffs on her wrists, and she stood there patient as a mountain while he did it, and when they came off, she rolled her shoulder once and rubbed the raw red mark and looked at him. "Officer Brandt," she said. "And here is the thing. Here is the whole thing." She was not smiling. There was no triumph on her. She looked at him almost sad, almost gentle, and that was worse for him than any rage could have been. "You wanted to know who they'd believe. You or me. I remember you asked me that. In my ear so the room wouldn't hear. Real quiet." She let that sit. "They're going to believe the logs, officer. They're going to believe the timestamps and the entry codes and 90 days of that door opening for scared kids and closing on empty backpacks. They're going to believe the camera that man's been holding since 6 this morning. It was never going to be you or me. It was always going to be the truth. You just never met anybody before who was willing to sit on a floor and wait for it." Then she turned away from him, because he was already finished and they both knew it, and she crouched down in front of Marcus Bell and put a hand on his shoulder. Hey, look at me. You've still got a flight. What time? At 6:40. She checked her watch. You've got 19 minutes. That's plenty. Bear's going to walk you to your gate himself, and Ms. Akaffer's going to give you a card, and next week when your hand stops shaking, you're going to call her, and she's going to make sure what happened to you today gets written down somewhere that matters. Not for revenge. For the next kid. So there isn't a next kid. You understand? He nodded, wiping his face. What are you studying? She asked him. Nursing, he said. I'm gonna be a nurse. Danielle smiled then, the first real smile of that whole long morning, and it changed her whole face. Course you are, she said softly. Course you are. World needs about 1,000 more of you. Go catch your flight, Marcus Bell. And when you're a nurse and somebody scared and alone comes into your at 3 in the morning, you remember what it felt like to have somebody stand up. Then you stand up for them. That's the whole deal. That's how it keeps going. Now go. But before he went, Marcus did something Danielle didn't expect, and it's worth telling. He stopped and he wiped his face, and he asked her name. Just her name so he'd have it. And she told him. Danielle Cross. And he said it back, careful, memorizing it, the way she'd memorized Brant's off his name plate hours before, though for the opposite reason. He said, I'm gonna tell people about you. My whole life. Is that okay? And Danielle, who had spent 30 years staying out of the light, being nobody so she could see everything, looked at this boy who was going to be a nurse and said, Tell them about the girl at the desk who printed the logs. That's who you tell them about. Her name's Mara. You remember that name too. And Marcus said he would. And he did. He tells people both names now when he tells it, which is often. Bear walked him to the gate. Marcus made his flight with 4 minutes to spare. Now let me tell you how it ended for the rest of them, because I know that's what you want, and you earned it by staying with me this long. The logs were real. 90 days of them, and then Rachel's people went back further, and it was worse than 90 days. It was 2 years. Officer Kyle Brandt and Officer P.D. Cole, and one supervisor who looked the other way for a cut, had run a quiet little machine through that gray door. Cash seized and never logged right. Bags searched with things found that the cameras somehow never caught going in. Signatures pressured onto forms by kids who just wanted to make their flight and go home to their mothers. Dozens of them. Mostly young. Mostly poor. Mostly people the machine had correctly guessed would never be believed. And here is the part that took a while to come out, the part that made it more than 3 bad men. Somebody had drawn them a map. Somebody in an office, somebody with access to the camera coverage and the shift schedules and the passenger data, had helped set up that gray door in the one blind spot in the terminal and had taken a cut for it. That was the direction the money ran, up and quiet, and that was the part that Rachel Akaffer cared about most, because Rachel had spent her whole career learning that you don't win by cuffing the arm. You win by finding the shoulder the arm is attached to. It took her the better part of a year. She found the shoulder. I won't bore you with how, because it was mostly spreadsheets, and spreadsheets don't make good stories. But I'll tell you that a man in a nice office who had never once touched a scared kid or a gray door ended up losing a great deal more than Kyle Brandt did. and he never saw it coming, because he thought he was too high up to be reached by anything that started on a floor in Terminal C. He was wrong. Danielle used to say the whole point is that nobody is too high up. That's the thing they can never quite believe until it's happening to them. They guessed right about all of them but one. It did not happen in a day, the way these things never do. But it happened. The video the heavy man in the blue jacket shot went where videos go, and this one had a face and a name and a lawyer behind it who did not let it die in a week. And I'll tell you what happened to Denny Kessler, because it's one of my favorite parts. Denny, the fastener salesman, the nosy man, he handed his phone to Rachel Ackafer right there in the terminal, and he gave a statement, and he signed it, and then something in him didn't want to go back to selling bolts. He testified twice in front of people who could have made his life hard for it. And when it was all over, Denny Kessler told a reporter that for 40 years he had watched things happen and filmed them and gone home, and that a woman he never got the name of had taught him in one morning that filming a thing and standing up for a thing are not the same, and that he decided at the age of 56 to start standing up. Last anyone heard, Denny volunteers now, drives people to court who are scared to go alone. A boring man with a phone. You never know who's going to turn out to matter. The logs went at people whose whole job is logs. Federal people got interested, the same kind of people who had once camped on Danielle's block for a summer and come up empty, and now here she was handing them a clean case tied up with a bow. And there is a particular flavor of irony in that which she allowed herself to enjoy exactly once, privately, and never mentioned again. Brandt was off the job inside a month and indicted inside 4. Cole rolled on him to save himself, which is what men like Cole always do, and the supervisor who looked away took early retirement into a criminal defense he could not afford. The gray door got a camera pointed right at it. Somebody higher up made a very quiet, very sincere apology to a young nursing student named Marcus Bell and cut him a check, and the check did not fix it but it paid his tuition, and Marcus is in his 2nd year now, and he is going to be a very good nurse. Myra kept her job. Danielle made sure of it, quietly, the grown-up way. One phone call to a man who owned a piece of the airport and owed the club a favor older than Mara was. The girl got a raise she never knew the reason for and a note in her personnel file that said she had shown, and I am quoting the note here, exceptional judgment under pressure. She'd printed the logs. Scared to death, she'd printed them anyway. That is what courage actually looks like most of the time. It is not a woman in leather on a floor. It is a tired 22-year-old with chewed nails hitting print when every part of her wants to run. And the visa. I promised you I'd come back to the visa, and I will, because it's the piece of this that Danielle worked hardest and said least about. The thing Brandt had used to hold Mara, the threat to her future, her whole reason for being 1,000 miles from home. Rachel Ackafer took that threat and turned it inside out. She got Mara named as a protected witness. She got a letter, on the right letterhead, that made Mara's status more solid than it had ever been, safer than it would have been if Brandt had never opened his mouth. The exact thing he'd used as a leash became, in the end, the thing that anchored her. Mara finished her degree. She's an accountant now, 3 states away, and every year on a certain date in August she sends Danielle Cross a card, and the card never says much, just a few words, but it always ends the same way. Thank you for saying my name. And every year Danielle writes back, "You said mine louder." Which was true. When it counted, the scared girl at the desk had hit print, and everything else in this whole story hung off of that one small brave thing. But I told you the ending would come back around to the beginning, and it does, so let me take you there. An hour after all of it, the terminal had gone back to being just a terminal. Announcements. Coffee. A kid chasing a paper airplane. Danielle Cross walked back into that business-class lounge, and this time nobody stopped her, and the watch commander himself held the door. Mara was still at the desk, red-eyed and shaky, and when she saw Danielle she started to apologize, and Danielle just reached across the counter and took the girl's hand in both of hers and held it for a second and said, "You did good. You hear me? You did good today. Go home tonight and be proud." Then she walked to the corner. Her corner. The deep leather chair by the tall window, where the light had gone from gray to gold. Somebody had cleaned the coffee off the carpet. The stain was gone like it had never been. She sat down slow, because her shoulder still ached where a man's hand had been twice, and she set her folder in her lap, the folder she'd carried in that morning, and for the first time she opened it. Inside was a photograph of an old man with a white beard and a wide laugh, a man the whole club had called Preacher, a man she was flying across the country to bury that afternoon. She looked at his face for a while. She had a thing she wanted to tell him and no way left to tell it, which is the whole cruelty of a funeral, so she just thought it instead. "We stood up for a kid today, old friend. Quiet like you taught me. You'd have liked how it went. And I'll tell you the last thing about Preacher, because it's why she is the way she is, and then I'll let her go bury him. Preacher was the one who found Danielle 40 years back, when she was younger than Marcus Bell, and had nobody and nothing, and every reason to become hard in the wrong way. He was the one who fed her and gave her a floor to sleep on and never once asked her for a thing. And when she asked him why he'd bother with a kid who couldn't do anything for him, he'd said the words that became the whole of her life. He'd said, "You help the ones who can't help you back. That's the only help that counts. Everything else is a trade." She had carried that 40 years. She'd carried it into a garage that smelled of oil, and married the mountain of a man who lived by it too. She'd carried it to the head of a table full of hard men, and made it the law. And that morning, on a floor in Terminal C, in front of a gray door, she had lived it one more time, for a boy who could do nothing for her. On the last day, the old man who taught it to her was above the ground. She thought he'd have liked the timing. She thought he'd have laughed his wide laugh at the timing. Bear came and eased down into the chair beside her, and Rachel took the one across, and one of the other brothers brought over a fresh coffee, black, and set it on the glass table in front of her without a word. And Bear, big old Bear, reached over and put his hand on her arm. The same arm. Right on the sore spot, but soft this time, barely a weight at all, the way you touch someone you have loved and worried over for 30 years. And that was the whole difference, wasn't it? That was the entire distance between the beginning of this story and the end of it. A hand on an arm. One hand grabs to make you smaller. One hand rests to tell you that you are not alone and never were. Same arm. Whole different world. "You okay, Prez?" Bear asked low. Danielle Cross picked up the coffee. She looked out the tall window at the plains lining up gold against the morning, at the wide, bright world going on about its business, none of it knowing how close it had come to eating one more kid whole. She took a slow sip. She thought about Ray, and about Preacher, and about a nursing student named Marcus Bell who would hold his head up now, and about a girl named Mara who had hit print. "Yeah," she said, and she let out one long breath, the same breath she'd taken when she first sat down that morning, only lighter now, all the way to the bottom. "Yeah, I'm all right." And she was. Believe me, she was.